All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Sorry for the delay, but thank you so much for joining. Today we'll be talking to Everett with Disaster Tech Lab about specific emergency communication services and a specific case that they did in Greece. So without further ado, Everett, I send it over to you.
Good morning or good afternoon, everybody, which part of the world you're dialing into at the moment. Apologies again for the delay. As Andrew said, I had a bit of an issue trying to get the software to run on my laptop, so I just had to switch to my tablet here. I'll start with giving a brief introduction for those of you who don't or who haven't heard of Disaster Tech Lab before. We're an NGO that I founded the organization back in 2010 following the earthquake in Haiti at the time. And what we do in very short description, we provide internet access and communication services in disaster areas across the globe. We've been in pretty much every disaster area in the last 7 years or the major disaster areas that where anything has happened. We've been in the US, for instance, after Hurricane Sandy and some of the other tornadoes and floodings. We've been in the Philippines, been in Nepal, we've been in Fiji, we're recently in Ecuador, we're at the moment also back in Haiti again after the recent typhoon there. So we're pretty much, we get around a bit doing what we do, and what actually happened is about just over 12 months ago, we were watching the refugee crisis unfold in the south of Europe, in Greece specifically, and we sat down with a few people in the organization and we looked at what was happening and made the decision that in spite of it not being our standard kind of disaster, because most of the disasters we responded to so far were natural disasters, and what was happening in Greece was specifically a humanitarian disaster, we decided that it might be worth to send a team down to see if we could assist there by providing internet access both to the refugees but also to the other NGOs and responding organizations. So if we go to the next slide there, Andrew. Yeah. We started out by sending a small team to the island of Lesvos, which was basically the hotspot. That's where most of the refugees were arriving from, in little inflatable rafts from Turkey. And we sent a team down there with the simple task, go have a look around, talk to the other organizations there, do a bit of an assessment of what the situation is and see if we maybe can set up a few Wi-Fi hotspots or a few locations where we can provide basic internet access. Now at the time when we arrived there was 1,000 to 3,000 refugees arriving every day. There was no facilities for them, there was no services that ranged from no internet access but also no food distribution, no accommodation, and the response effort was pretty much just starting. So we got in on the ground pretty early, and what happened is that a couple of days after the team arrived we were approached by representatives of the UNHCR who at that point had only recently arrived themselves, and were looking at the option of setting up a couple of refugee camps on the island to house the refugees, because obviously these people arrived with very little. They needed some kind of accommodation, they needed medical care, etc. And they needed, obviously, not only the refugees but also people like the UNHCR staff and other responding organizations needed some connectivity. But at that point there was basically nothing there. So if we move on to the next slide, that shows you pretty much how everything started out. When we were approached by the UNHCR, we asked them, okay, where are these camps going to be built? So we were shown two locations on the island of Lesbos. One was just north of the main town of Mytilene, and the other one was slightly more northeast in an area called Moria. Now Mytilene, as you see on the picture on the left, it was basically a greenfield site. It was in a large olive orchard beside an industrial estate, but there was no infrastructure whatsoever. Moria was a bit better off in the form that it was a former detention center, so they had some kind of accommodation buildings there and some management buildings, but there was also no infrastructure in regards to internet access and communications. What you see in the picture also is basically at the point where we sat down with the UNHCR people and we looked at the site layout. We looked at, okay, how can we actually cover this area with sufficient Wi-Fi cover, and then basically we make the decision, like we had to put a point-to-point link in place from a nearby location, because obviously there's no DSL or cable internet in an olive orchard, so we had to bring in internet access, and we had to carry out a site survey, obviously seeing then where can we receive the signal from the point-to-point link and where can we actually put in our equipment. But like I said, we had to pretty much start from scratch. So it was quite a bit of a challenge, both infrastructure and network planning and such things as actually getting an internet connection at all onto the site. There were obviously, like I said, there were a number of sites. There was Karatepe camp, that's the one just north of Mytilene where you just saw the pictures. There was another, the other camp was in Moria, and if you move on to the next slide, you get a bit of an overview of the actual locations of the different points. That's a screenshot from CN Maestro, for us actually the indispensable tool that we've used throughout the deployment to remotely configure and manage the network. You see on the map there to your right of the screen, you see 4 locations. The one kind of most to your right in the middle of the 4 points, that's the camp in Mytilene camp just north, Karatepe camp just north of the capital. And then the 2 at the top left is, the bottom one of the 2 is Moria camp, and the one just above that to the right is actually a relay point. Because we, like I said earlier there, we have to build a point-to-point link to bring internet access into Karatepe camp, and then we obviously had to connect Moria also to internet access, so we had to build a point-to-point link from the first camp to the second camp. But as always with these things, nature doesn't work, it doesn't cooperate, so there was a ridge in the way, so we had to go looking for a relay point, which we found in an old disused water tower slightly north of Moria camp. So that's the 3 points that we connected together to bring internet access to the second camp. And then if you look at the point on the map right at the bottom of the screen there, that's actually the highest point in the island, where there was a very large telecoms mast, and eventually we also ended up with an equipment in that telecoms mast so that we can connect other locations to and have a kind of great location from there to shoot point-to-point links to wherever we wanted it on the island. And then if we move on to the next slide, you get a bit more of a detail of the actual network planning. That's the initial plan as we set it up for Karatepe camp. You see the bottom of the screen, it's actually an electrical shop. There's an electrician who sold electrical supplies as they do. We basically just wandered in there and explained the situation to them, that the camp, which is just north of his business, then the olive orchard, that we needed internet access in there, and would he be so inclined to let us put a fast internet connection into his premises that we can then use as a gateway to provide Wi-Fi internet access to the camp. Luckily, he was very amicable and willing to cooperate, and I must say most of the Greek people on the island and of Lesbos and on the Greek mainland are very much involved with the state of and the situation of the refugees, so they're all very eager to cooperate. And of course, we as a kind of offer, we said, okay, if you let us put DSL, VDSL line into your premises, then we will install 1 or 2 Wi-Fi access points in your business premises, so you get nice fast Wi-Fi internet access. And then we planned out, obviously, the VDSL line that we got was a 50 meg connection, which is the fastest we could get. And we looked at the location, the layout of the camp. You see the coverage areas in the middle there. That's all, like especially with the little trees are. That's all where tents were being set up for the refugees. The one at the top right, it says Karatepe UN registration. That was kind of the admin area in the camp where all the UN had set up their small prefab building for the refugee administration. There was like food distribution, all that kind of stuff. So that we had to kind of coordinate that in. That it was very important. That area had a very good connection, and then The other areas, obviously, we provided as good a connection and as much coverage as was possible. So this was the initial plan that we drew up, but of course, as with all plans, things never exactly work out as you wanted to do. So we set out from this plan, and then the second slide, the slide after this, shows you the plan for the other camp. That's Moria. As you can see from the image, there was a lot more infrastructure there. There was buildings, kind of accommodation buildings. As I said, it used to be a combination detention center and army camp out in the middle of nowhere, but the advantage we had there is that because of the buildings and the use, there was electricity in all locations, and there was quite a lot of Ethernet already available run throughout the camp, so it was easy for us to kind of plug into that existing infrastructure than rather than have to build everything completely from scratch. And at the top of this image you see here, I don't know how clear it is, but it says Moria Refugee Center. That's the gateway for that camp, where we brought in the point-to-point link from the water tower relay terminated, and then from there we did multi-point links and some just links via existing Ethernet infrastructure to provide as much cover and service throughout that camp. And then the next slide shows you kind of an overview how we actually had to put the relay in place. To the right, it's a Google Earth image, so there's lots of crud and little bits on it. But to the right is kind of where the Karatepe camp is and where we got our VDSL line. And the purple area to the left is where Moria camp is, and at the top is where the disused water tower was that we used as a repeater site. So you can kind of see we had to shoot a link from bottom right up to the repeater site, which I think, if I recall rightly, is about 5 or 6 miles, and then from there we had to shoot it back down into Moria camp, and then provide locally distributed using the combination of point to multi-point links and existing Ethernet infrastructure. Next slide shows you some images of the actual locations where we installed equipment. This is some pictures of the disused water tower. On the left is as we found it. You see two of our people there bringing equipment up. It was literally, the way we found it was just a question of identifying the location from the map where it would be, physical terrain feature most suitable to install equipment, and just literally driving around. When I was there myself, I was there with Martin Kedding, who's who also works for Cambium as a trainer. Some of you might know him, some of you might not, but we drove around in our little rental car, and we spotted this disused water tower, so we got as close to it as possible. Had to literally walk up, climb up the tower, and find out if we could see both locations from there. Then there's the usual thing, finding out who owns the tower, getting permission to actually put equipment on there, arranging power, because obviously, like, a disused water tower doesn't have a electrical supply already installed. Initially we had to bridge that by using solar panels and batteries, but at a later stage we were able to actually run an electrical supply up there, borrowing with permission the electric supply of the nearby house. The picture on your right shows you one of our volunteers. This is a local person, a Greek guy, because that's one of the things we do. When we go anywhere, be it Greece or Nepal or the Philippines, we also try to work as much as possible with local people, because you bring a certain amount of skills into the area, so that it helps the local population too. And this kind of shows you the pole that you see in the picture on the left on top of the water tower, which is very conveniently there already. We were able to install the Cambium equipment on there. You see the bottom left of the right picture, you see some small picture of the solar panels, and there's a metal box that we had fabricated for the batteries. And this is just literally the setting up and configuring the link to, I think this is a link to Karatepe camp. Next slide show you some pictures of the installation, the camps themselves. These prefab units that they were using, you see the picture on the left, they're a bit dirty, but they're kind of flatback and amazing enough, they're actually designed by IKEA for the UNHCR, their refugee accommodation. These things come in flatback on panels. They're easy to put on pallets. They're easy to put together, and obviously we used those as a base to put poles up against to mount the equipment. On the left, you see one of our volunteers putting some equipment on. On the right, you see a finished installation which has two EPMP 1000 units. One, if you look at the pole, one on the left is set up as part of a point-to-multipoint link to the central location where the VDSL service is, and the one on the right with the two duck antennas on there. That's the local hotspot for the local distribution of the Wi-Fi signal. And then if you go to the next slide again, it shows you the picture on the left, gives you an idea. As I said earlier, there was no electricity on site, so we had to develop a solution to provide power for the units, and we used solar panels and batteries to do that from a company called Goal Zero in the US. And the solar panels, obviously, you can see where those are mounted, but obviously we had to use the batteries, and they had to be mounted in a secure box, including with the power supply for the access points and the hotspots. So there was a lot of design and construction involved, going as basic as actually digging the hole and putting the cement in to actually put the pole in. The boxes were designed locally and put together for us by a local person. The brackets for the solar panels were designed by us. So, you know, besides in this kind of work, it's more than actually just designing and putting together a Wi-Fi network. In some situations, you have to build the actual mounting infrastructure and the power supplies and everything right from scratch. And the picture on the right then shows you, it's kind of a close-up of the finished installation that we used in the camps. It's the left is again is one end of a point-to-multipoint link, and the one on the right is the EPMP 1000 unit providing local Wi-Fi internet access. And if we move on to the next slide, again, another bit of an impression. You see the picture on the left again. It's similar to the one I showed you. In the previous slide, it shows the prefab buildings that the refugees eventually are housed in. There's rows and rows of those in the that have been put up at that stage in these olive orchards, and we put a number of these poles up with the solar panels and the battery boxes. And then the image on the right shows you again is the point-to-point link being installed. This is actually one in Mytilene itself on the police headquarters. Because when we arrived in Moria camp, which was managed by the Greek police at the time, they were doing the intake and the registration of all arriving refugees there before they were processed and moved onwards to other locations. But one of the things that we discovered to our amazement, they had an almost non-existent internet connection. They had a very slow microwave link to the headquarters, but it wouldn't allow them to, for instance, verify and run data that there were registration data of each refugee against a database in real time, obviously to pick out on any unwanted elements out there. I mean, while the majority of refugees are obviously people with valid reason to flee their homeland, these kind of registration processes require a certain amount of screening, which wasn't really possible. I mean, we were told by one of the police officers we spoke to that the procedure at the time was that they would take all the data, copy it onto a USB stick, and drive to the police station once or twice a day to actually run all the new data against the existing database. So we promptly offered them to build a point-to-multipoint link from that camp to Mytilene, the capital, to their police station, so they would have a live, relatively high-speed link to between the camp and the police station, and they could run all this data and against the database in real time. So we had to go up to the obviously police station and put equipment up there, connected up to the network. We had the extra benefit there that the police IT manager was one of the first people we bumped into, so he helped us also with getting access to all the locations. He helped us install everything. He knew obviously the existing infrastructure, and he's helped us a lot with the ongoing management and extension of the network. So, you know, that's by sometimes offering a bit of assistance to a local organization like the police department. It opens lots of doors and allows you to then provide the services that are needed faster and quicker. Now, if we move on to the next slide again, it shows, as I said earlier, mentioned, I see at Maestro the Cambium's kind of remote management tool for the equipment and the different networks has been a fantastic help for the reasons. I mean, it's obviously for anybody who works with Cambium equipment, it's a very useful tool. But for us, the nature of our organization is that we work with volunteers, and especially in the long lasting deployment as the one in Greece, which has been going on for us now, like we've been on the ground for about 14-15 months now. Volunteers are normally never on the, deployed for longer than 2 weeks, so we have a large turnover of personnel on the ground with a variety of technical skills. Some of them might have worked with Cambium equipment before, some of them haven't. We provide a certain amount of hands-on training, but obviously it's great for us that we can, for instance, installation, at point of installation of equipment, that we can work together with the team on the ground who will physically install the equipment. Obviously, we plan the network beforehand, but while they're installing it, that somebody, either myself or somebody else in the organization, can log into CN Maestro, and actually, as soon as the equipment, a piece of equipment appears online, that we can then remotely configure it, we can troubleshoot it, etc. We can assist and deal with any issues in real time without always having to be on the ground. So that makes it a lot easy. Additionally, it allows us to monitor and troubleshoot the network down to the latest detail. I mean, we can see, and I'll show some slides about that later. We can obviously see when a unit is down. We can see the usage levels, be it the amount of data going across the point-to-point link down to the data on each individual access point. We can see the number of users. You know, we can manage pretty much every detail that's possible from any location in the world, as long as we have internet access. So that makes things a lot easier for us, and we've used it very extensively, and Cambium has been very helpful with explaining everything to us and dealing with any issues that we have, because obviously, like, you know, as any good company, they're constantly developing and fine-tuning their products. So, you know, occasionally it's been that a beta version that wasn't even out for release of CMS, that we were already given access, so we could both use it and give some feedback. And to give you an idea of how much we can drill down in the data, if we move on to the next slide. This gives you an idea of the usage. For instance, this is a single hotspot in Moria camp. Now you can see, obviously, it's just under 2 months ago. Total usage on a single hotspot in that week was 388 gigabytes. Now we had 4 of those in the camp, and they're all getting fairly much equal usage. And you can see, obviously, some days it peaks, it goes up and down a bit, but it gives you an idea about the amount of data, the demand on the network, and obviously what's important also, that we have sufficient backhaul, and that's always a big challenge, because in certain areas, like obviously in Greece, we were lucky enough to be able to start out with a VDSL line. We've upgraded our backhaul since, and I'll get to that in a minute. But in all the deployments that we have, for instance, we have to rely on satellite links or even slower connections. We have deployments where we actually have to node option and use LTE or 4G as a backhaul connection, and then being able, not only obviously by traffic shaping and bandwidth throttling, kind of, you know, evenly share the available bandwidth between every user, being able, like in this instance, being able to see the exact amount of data being used and looking for certain patterns to manage the network in an equitable way and make sure, obviously, that the network doesn't get overloaded. You know, having this capability, it's fantastic. Like, it doesn't mean that, it means that, you know, we don't need somebody on site all the time to manage it, to monitor this and react accordingly, but that anybody within the organization can remotely log in and monitor this data and set up certain alerts and react on certain urgencies. Now, next slide shows you some more detail. This is a new hotspot that we had just put up there in the middle of October. And it shows again, this is all screenshot again from CN Maestro. So it shows you the number of wireless clients. Obviously it goes up and down a bit. And on the right it shows you the throughput. Now, obviously being, from a performance perspective, I would like, for instance, the throughput to be more of a horizontal line. But the challenge with our line of work is that, you don't always have full control over all the components in the network. For instance, with point-to-point links, they could be mounted on slightly unstable structures. So, if it's the wind starts blowing and your antenna or your pole starts swinging a bit, then the quality of your link drops, and things like throughput and that can be affected by that. And obviously the same with, the upload and download speed. But, this allows us to monitor those kind of things very much in real time as well as retrospectively. So that's that benefit again. Then again, the next slide. It shows you again, we can see an overview of each individual node. So if you look on the left, there's kind of a tree structure which shows the different sites. You can click on a drop-down arrow and then right down to, for instance, this kind, you get the main screen here, is one specific access point, a hotspot in this case, in Moria Camp. It shows you the uptime, it shows you the number of people connected, the channels, it's like as you see here on the right too, it shows the IP addresses, MAC addresses for channel, and like basically anything you would want to know about the actual each individual piece of equipment and each individual node. And then again, and if you see the tree structure on the right, you can kind of click on it and you can see groups. You can now also, in the latest version of CN Maestro, you can organize it into different sites, and I have some images later to show that, but again, it shows you the amount of detail that's available using that. The next slide shows you a bit more again of overview, kind of a weekly overview. So if you look at stuff retrospectively, like how did my hotspot or how did my point-to-point link perform, you can look at it and it will show you again on the left-hand side the number of clients again, and you see them obviously dipping up and down, which in these cases basically coincide with waking and sleeping patterns. Obviously when everybody goes to sleep, the number of clients drops down, and when everybody, the peaks are kind of during the middle of the day. And on the right again, you see the throughput with a couple of peaks in there. So because obviously, as I explained earlier, the actual physical infrastructure in the network isn't always as stable as we would like it to be, but that's, you depend on the certain circumstances, so that kind of impacts on the quality of your links and your throughput also. Then next slide again, let me just go back there. It shows you on the complete network and an overview. You click on one piece and it shows you the point to multi-point access points, how many on a specific location there are. So, the point to multi-point AP, the subscriber modules, and then the number of Wi-Fi hotspots. So, you get an overview of that again. It shows how many are up, how many are down. You can click on, for instance, if it says 1 or 2 or 3 down, you click on that and it pulls up the window again, showing you how many, showing those individual devices and the number, the downtime and possibly issues, and it then allows you then to when a device is online again, it allows you to make real-time configuration changes. So again, great help. So like I said, CN Maestro has been very much indispensable. Like our work would have been a lot more difficult and a lot more labor intensive without it. Moving on, one of the things that we did on top of the actual network management, once we had a good amount of infrastructure up and running and a certain amount of stable, the network was stable to an extent, we also want to know obviously what are people actually doing with this network that we're providing them with this server. So we used a tool called NTOP, which lets you basically analyze and crunch all the data of your network, drill it down by application, and here just gives you an idea. I mean, there's a huge amount of data and reporting that it allows you to do, but this shows you a breakdown by application level. You know, again, in a nice flow pie diagram and a flow chart by date. You know what kind of application people were using, and you see that like broken down. Fiber was there's a lot of USB and a lot of direct communication apps that were very popular in Greece by the refugees, and you see difference here. Things like Telegram, Viber was popular. Skype was also used. It's not on here, but Skype is actually taking a smaller role there, so it's more the newer things. WhatsApp is also hugely popular, and this allows us kind of to see, you know, what apps are being used, what are the peak times for stuff being for certain apps being used, and you know, once you have that data, it allows you to fine-tune your network and you know, prioritize certain services and kind of downgrade the available bandwidth for services that aren't much used. Because obviously with limited amount of bandwidth, you don't want everybody to start pulling, firing up Netflix and watching movies and sucking up all your bandwidth. So it's important to know what people are doing with the network. Next slide again is also from NTOP, but it shows you some more details about user statistics. Kind of shows, you know, the IP address, local one, and then which servers they were connected to. One of the things that was very interesting that we found out, and it doesn't show here, but I mean, by analyzing the network, is that all the Facebook data, obviously Facebook is heavily used in these environments, was going via the Facebook data center not too far down the road from our headquarters in Ireland. So you know, it's kind of funny to come across that. But this shows you again, you know, the detail that we try to go into eventually when the network is stable, and that the amount of data that we use kind of to improve the quality of service. Then just moving on to some of the challenges. As I said earlier, we had to actually build everything from scratch. You know, like as the picture here illustrates, this is Miguel, who's our project manager in Greece in Karatepe camp, putting basically the equipment up on one of the poles. Like we had to find, obviously, first find the location that we put the pole in. We had the pole designed, the boxes of the battery designed and built. So you know, there's a lot of work involved in this case to build everything from scratch. Next slide. It shows you, as well, I mean, I presume all of you know, seeing that I presume most people or everybody tuning in now it works in the field of Wi-Fi or data networking to a certain extent, but something I always encounter when I talk to people who don't work with Wi-Fi is that they're amazed about how much cabling needs to be run to put up a wireless network. So, you know, the term wireless is a bit misnomer, but in these cases, again, this is a camp in mainland Greece, a camp called Oinofita, and we had to put access points and hotspots on different buildings. Obviously, there's cable has to be run from the rooftops down to both connect devices to the cable network, or to just basically provide power over Ethernet. So that's, you know, it shows you again what some of the challenges that we had to do. That we had to find, you know, how the cable could be run. We had to find out, you know, identify where the different power sources, etc. Now the next slide, the one that's on now at the moment, this shows you again the issue with power. Like in a lot of camp, it was not a question of find the nearest power socket. There was just no power whatsoever at all. So as I said, we installed solar panels. Well, we had to ship in solar panels, we had to ship in batteries, we had to design the battery boxes in such a way that everything, of course, could be mounted on a pole and in a stable way, because obviously you don't want this to fall over and injure somebody or damage some you know, accommodation aside from the actual network going down. If that happens, you know, there's lots of things to consider. Picture on the right shows you kind of what's inside under these boxes. We have 3 batteries from Goal Zero, which are, you know, the nice devices, of batteries with power sockets on them. They're easy to monitor. There's a small MikroTik router in there, even at the bottom there. That white thing is actually a small LED light just to enable anybody who works in a box to not only have some light if it's dark, but also the example of the advantage of putting a small light like that in, if you plug that directly in a power source and leave it on, if the power source goes down, the light goes out, so you can actually see from a distance if when a node goes down, if it's a power issue or not. So that's some of the things that you learn while you're doing this kind of work. Next slide, please. One of the things that came to a surprise to me and a lot of our people, Greece isn't always sunny. We were in when I first started working in September in last year in Greece. It was nice sunny weather. There was nice, the usual pictures you expect from Greece, or what you've seen, the blue sea and the idyllic little harbors and everybody walking around in shorts and t-shirts. But it's not like that all year round. There's actually in the winter quite heavy snow, ice, sleet, everything you can imagine. And obviously beside that having very negative impacts on the refugees camping in tents and prefab buildings, it also affects your network and hence your network performance. On the left you see two dishes and an EPMP device completely covered in snow and ice, which had obviously affects your throughput and your signal quality. So that's something that we had to consider, and obviously there's not much you can do about that. You have to just go up, and if it gets too bad, you might have to scrape some ice off or something. But there's no way of avoiding that. On the right is what happened in December, for instance, when a big storm hit the island. Obviously, with panels and a box mounted on high on the pole, there was a lot of wind load, and a number of these, like this pole, you can see it's bent. It kind of bent at the bottom. Which resulted obviously in it losing the connectivity on the point-to-point link. But a number of the other poles that we had installed is literally just under the wind load, just completely broke and fell over, and the equipment smashed, and basically the whole network went down. So that's kind of things that we learned the hard way, and that we in the future we know that we have to put in either heavier poles or guy lines or whatever kind of way of mount the solar panels in a different way. So that's that's some of the challenges that we faced and that we since have overcome, because obviously Greece is going into another winter now, so we want to avoid these kind of issues as much as we can, especially the issues with storm damage. Another challenge, as you see in the next slide, is that the camps kept growing and growing and growing. As I said in the first slide, when we first arrived, there was 1,000 to 3,000 people arriving. But what happened is they all wanted to move into the rest of Europe, so they would go to Moria camp and register there, spend maybe 2 or 3 days on the island, and then they would jump on the nearest ferry to Athens, to the capital of Greece, and from there on they would disperse into Europe. Then early this year, the EU entered into agreement with Turkey about how to handle the refugees, and one of the biggest decisions in that was that the refugees were no longer allowed to freely travel into Europe once they arrived in Greece. They had to stay in camps, go through a lengthy registration process and an asylum application. And the direct result of that is that most of the refugees would be in a specific camp for 6 months or more. Now that obviously meant a huge backlog, so the camps on Lesvos started growing, plus there was the decision made to build another 50 or 60 camps on 50 to 60 camps on the mainland, the Greek mainland. Some of those have been closed down by now, but at the time they had to just accommodate, because what was happening is that people were traveling into Greece, reaching the border, and then not being able to travel any further to cross that border. So there was all kinds of ad hoc camps being set up. But this case again, this picture is Karatepe camp that's the first one we started working in September last year. But obviously that kept growing and growing, and prefab units and larger tents, as you can see, kept being added and added. So the area that needed service kept growing, the number of users kept growing. So that's a challenge that we had to kind of dynamically adjust to by extending our network, extending coverage, and also looking at such things as increasing the available backhaul to be able to actually handle the network demand. Now, some of the ideas here. The next slide, please. To give you an idea of some of the users, I see this. I will just go back one slide there. Oh, we seem to miss one. Okay, just go forwards again. that's the one. I see, like, I mean, a lot of these refugees are just young people, you know, kids, teenagers. There's also obviously older people, families, etc. But like everybody in our own society, they all carry smartphones. That's literally the main device, and you know, I would dare to say that about 90% of the people have a smartphone from some quality or whatever, or some vintage. And like we see, for instance, on the beaches themselves, when the refugees are arriving, most of them would only carry very little. Like they would have all their stuff in a little backpack. And what you would see most of the time if you were on the beaches, they would arrive. The first thing that they would grasp is inside their jacket, inside their coat, and they would dig out a smartphone that was wrapped in 100 different layers of plastic or cellophane and tape to protect it during their trip across the water. They would rip that plastic up off the device, fire it up, and that would literally be their first point of contact. Is surprisingly enough, we found that the majority of them didn't even know what country they arrived in. So, you know, how did they find out? It's you know, the communication is essential. They had to find out obviously where to go, you know, which refugee camp, what services are available, etc. So that's why, you know, things like providing Wi-Fi in these refugee camps is essential. It's the main point of access to data. It's, you know, it's important for you or I. If we go traveling, for instance, for business, we check out that we have a hotel with certainly when we go abroad, we check out that we have a hotel with a decent internet service, and you know, so that we can stay in touch with friends, family, business, you know, where we have access to information. We can fire up Google Maps to look for directions. We can fire up Skype to talk to people, and that's the same requirements are for basically applied to the refugees, and from young to old. So that was important. That's one of the reasons why we did this. A UK-based magazine actually did some research at the end of last year. They interviewed people on the beaches, and they reported back that the first two questions that the refugees in general asked when they arrived, so the first was, what country is this? And the second one was, where can we get Wi-Fi? So hence the value, again, the proven value of the service that we provide. Then again, if you go on to the next slide, you see some more users of the Wi-Fi you installed. This is in Moria camp. You can see the sign stuff put up that we put the kind of primitive signs, but they get the picture across. You know, it has DTL Wi-Fi, which is the network SSID. It has it in Arabic. It has the international Wi-Fi symbol there, so people knew where to go. And what you also need to see here is very essential: recharging facilities. Because obviously, like all these devices suck up power, and you know, battery quality even in the better devices is still not good enough to last very long. So because these people were so reliant on these devices for contact and information, facilities to recharge them was very essential. So anywhere where there's like power strips available, they would just congregate in droves to sit and go online. And we've seen it even in some of the villages of the towns like Mytilene, where any power source would literally be hacked in. They would pull open power boxes and even light poles beside the street. They would try to get access to power there. And you know, I've wondered many times when we've seen these things, kind of wondered that nobody electrocuted themselves. And as far as I know, luckily that didn't happen. But it shows you again how these kind of things, besides providing Wi-Fi, also providing a facility to recharge devices is very, very important. Move on to the next slide again, which shows you same camp, shows you close up of the signs we're putting up. They're not very fancy signs, but you know, they did the job, and we weren't going to spend lots of money in putting signs up when we have the few funds that we have. We could better spend on more important things. But again, this served to get the issue across. We had also people walk around the camp and explaining to people that there was Wi-Fi and how to use it. But we found also that the minute we would put a device up anywhere and it would actually fire it up and it would get internet access, it would immediately 20, 30, 40 people would be connected to it within minutes without even telling anybody, because obviously they're all constantly looking for some form of connectivity. Another thing that was very important, I haven't got a slide to illustrate that, but when the decision was made earlier this year to implement this very strict asylum application process, somebody in the UN had the absolute fantastic brainwave to decide that the first intake call for the asylum application had to be made via Skype. Yes, I'm silent there for a second by the sheer ignorance of that, because at that point there were thousands of people, tens of thousands of people staying in camps in tents that didn't even have running water, that didn't have sufficient food, that didn't have electricity, and in a lot of cases obviously didn't have internet access. But somebody in an office in Geneva decided that, yes, let's do this whole thing via Skype, so we don't have to leave our office. And obviously that put an extra amount of urgency on organizations like ours to provide Wi-Fi of a level to be able to handle Skype calls as quickly as possible, so that it kind of sped up the whole thing. Just to give you some more statistics again, if you go to the next slide, it gives you an overview again of, let me see, the network performance over a longer period. Again, using CN Meister, what I showed earlier, just to show you some indication of you know, allowance of the use of the network, the amount of bandwidth we provided. Next slide again shows you the line, for instance, the load on the VDSL line in, for instance, last December. You know, so because the way we set up things, we try to do as much real-time monitoring of the network remotely. Obviously, there's also some amount of monitoring on site of the crew, but I mean, quite often the people who were on the ground had much more busier things, more important things to do, such as installing equipment and do site surveys, etc., rather than monitoring the network. So we would monitor it remotely, do any configuration changes, and only if we then identify the need to somebody to go and physically make any changes, we would work with the team on the ground. Then in the next slide I'll tell you some of the latest developments that we've done, because obviously we started out with a VDSL line of 50 megabits per second, which was okay, but I mean it's not a huge amount of bandwidth, but it's kind of, you know, what means are the best means available. After a few months on the island, we started working with a local volunteer who worked with the university in Mytilene, and he kind of came up with the idea of possibly working together with the university and allowing us to connect to the university's network, which is run by a Greek department, a sub-department from the Department of Education called GRNet, and they handle all the IT services and connectivity for the Department of Education, all the schools and universities. And obviously the University of Mytilene had a fast network. They had a 500 meg fiber network, and after much negotiation we were allowed to connect our backbone into their network, which would add 500 megs to capacity to our backbone. Picture on the left shows you on top of the university building we put the point-to-point, one end of the point-to-point link, and in the distance is the mountain that's the highest point in Greece, and I mentioned it briefly earlier, there's a large telecom tower on there, and at that point we already had equipment there that was part of a point-to-point link to two of the camps. So by connecting the university infrastructure to the existing equipment on that mast, we were basically connecting tying the whole thing together and increasing the available amount of bandwidth on the backhaul by 10, which made a huge difference. Then if you go on the next slide, that shows you kind of an overview of Greece. On the top right is the island of Lesvos, where we had the two camps and the couple of the relay points, and then on the left at the bottom is Greek mainland, Athens. We've kind of taken on responsibility of the Attica province, which is kind of Athens and anything kind of north of Athens. That there's when we took that on in, I think it was March this year, there was 18 camps in there that we took on to provide internet access there. Now quite a lot of them have closed since, because what decision was made is kind of close the smaller camps and move those people into the larger camps. So that made the number of camps over the last 6 or 7 months, the number of camps that we had to manage made it smaller, but it also made the demands in the actual camps that we were looking after larger, of course, when there's more people moving in there. But this gives you an idea, like, you know, the geographical spread of where we're working. Then next slide shows again user statistics of one of the newer camps in Oinafita. That's a single AP. We put that in about, that network went live about 3 weeks ago. It's one of the smaller camps, but there's 4 access points in there, 4 hotspots. And at that point, well, initially when we started out last year, and for most last years, we were using EPMP 1000 devices in 2.4 gigahertz. We've now lately started switching in the newer CN Pilot E500 devices, which have dual radio. So we both service, or we both provide service in 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. But as you can see from the image on the left, the graph there, the actual number of users are as large as on 2.4 gigahertz because of simply the type of devices that the refugees have. They are a bit older, and the 5 gigahertz devices, if you drill down into the network usage statistics, you will actually see that most of those are NGO workers with fancy new iPhones or MacBooks, etc. So that shows you the difference. But again, that allows us to get an overview of the data, and then in CN Maestro again we can click down. We actually see by each individual device what type of device is, what the MAC address is, what the firmware is. So that there's a lot of data to be had there. The next slide is kind of a summary of lessons learned. The logical thing, well, one of the most important things is double, triple, and quadruple redundancy, because as it says there, things will fail and things will fail again. The work in Greece with the refugees has been our most challenging deployment so far, for several reasons. I mean, first of all, historically we're an organization that does rapid response. We would go into a disaster area, provide internet access and communication service for a relatively short duration. I mean, up to the refugee crisis, the longest we would stay in an area is 2 to 3 months at most. When the existing infrastructure came up again, we would leave because obviously our services weren't needed. Greece, like I said, we've been there since September last year, so that makes it 14 months. So even quick fix solutions that were put in, for instance, September, October, or November last year, they obviously start failing. The strain on the equipment is much harder. There's such things as weather, there's such things as people. We had instances where people were moving some of the prefab buildings in camps, and because our equipment and the poles that the equipment were mounted on were attached to those buildings, but they didn't know obviously what a Wi-Fi access point is, because that's not their work. They would literally just pull the pole down, throw it in the ditch and leave it. So there's all these kind of things. So there's so many things that can go wrong, and you have to plan for it as much as possible, or at least realize that things are going to go wrong. Rather be doing so, you might be having other obligations. Another point that we learned is that hot swapping equipment is much more efficient than fixing in place. It's kind of self-explanatory. Prices go down. It's quite often much easier to have a pre-configured similar device ready and just go send somebody out there and just literally swap the device out. Once it's online, we can use CN Maestro to fine-tune the configuration, and then the device you take out, you can bring that back and you can then look at it. What's wrong with it? Is it a physical default? Is it a software issue, etc.? But by hot swapping it, you basically have the least amount of downtime rather than to endlessly fix the issue on site. And third point, remote access and management is making our life so much easier. I mean, I can get into the call on, oh, this access point in this part of the camp isn't working, or it's suddenly very slow. And if I hadn't already seen it, or if nobody in our organization had already spotted that, because we monitor remotely, we can then just literally log on. I could be I just in a meeting somewhere, or I could be out on the road, or one of our other technical people could be somewhere, and they could just log in to CN Maestro and see what's wrong with the device, and if possible, fix it remotely. And if not, then we know we have to send somebody out to hot swap the device. To give you a real life example, yesterday we had a crew out in Scaramangas camp in Athens trying to install some hardware. They had some issues with it, and luckily Martin, who is our main tech guru, especially on Cambium equipment, who was actually running training class in Amsterdam. You know, just a quick message, and he was able to, when he had a spare 10 minutes, just literally log on and try to help fix the problem. That's all thanks to such as I see in Maestro. Another point is that Cambium's hand-on support has been absolutely fantastic. You know, the guys, and I'm not just saying that because this is a Cambium webinar, but it's one of the great things that has made this deployment a success. We have basically we had support on call. We have guys been able that if we had software issues or load issues, like we had at one point where we had a couple of access points in one location that as soon as the user number hit 100, the device would just hang. So Cambium was literally dedicated a couple of tech people to solve that specific problem, make firmware adjustments, and let us roll out that new adjusted firmware. At some points they even helped out hands-on by logging into RC and Maestro and getting onto helping fixing configuration. So they've actually been, you know, fantastic and invaluable contribution to our work. So, you know, I would like to thank them for that. And then another point is that what I always tell our people, that new volunteers, is anything is better than nothing. You know, if you have a bunch of people, in this case in refugee camp, you know, in previous deployment in a disaster zone, even 128 kilobits per second or even 64 kilobits per second is better than no connectivity. So you have to quite often, if you're a seasoned network administrator, you have to throw all your preconceptions and ideas about what standards should be achieved. You have to pretty much throw them out of the window. You know, in this kind of environment, you cannot work to those standards because it's impossible. There's so many subjective influences and factors outside of your control that you just have to, you know, again, anything is better than nothing. And even if you have to share, you know, 1 or 2 megs between a large amount of people, and you screw the throttling down to 64 kilobits per second, people will still use that, and it will the connection will still have a huge amount of value for them. So, you know, that you have to not come out of standard, oh, we all have to have 200 meg fiber connections. You know, that just doesn't work. So that's something that, I mean, I knew that, and a lot of people who've been with us longer have knew that already, but because of the size of the deployment, we have had a lot of new volunteers working with us in this deployment, so that's one of the lessons that they learned. But also, yes, you can serve 400,000 people on a budget, and 400,000 it's a huge number. It's like, I mean, it's crazy, quite honestly. I mean, but it is the number of people who went to those 2 camps in Lesvos since we started there. So we have, you know, I'm not going to claim that every one of those 400,000 people used our Wi-Fi, but a lot of them did. And we have been able to provide that on a very, very small budget. Like we're a charitable donation. We you know, we depend to do our work on volunteers. We depend on equipment donors such as Cambium, and we depend on, or we rely on corporate and private financial donations to fund our very small costs. And to give you an idea, like, I mean, our overheads this year, like we're nearly at the end of the year now, our total financial cost of running and expanding everything in Greece is less than 20,000, you know, and that includes flights, accommodation, everything else. So, you know, that shows you what can be done on a small budget. And then the last point, what we learned, Greece isn't always sunny. I showed that earlier with some of the pictures that, you know, you get snow, you get ice, you get road situations where cars will just literally skid off the road because there's so much sleet on the road. So, you know, there isn't so much a technical issue that we deal with, but that's something that it was very much a lesson learned that came as a big surprise to most of us. Now then, on to the next and last slide. You know, if you just a little bit of call to action here. If you kind of like what you've just read, if you think that, you know, that we as an organization do possibly interesting work, and you want to learn that more, you can volunteer. I mean, like I said, we depend on volunteers, and volunteers can be people who volunteer for a weekend, a week, a month. You know, I mean, obviously, like when deployments like Greece, we kind of, especially when we fly people in from outside of Greece, we kind of try to make people deploy for like a week or 10 days or 2 weeks. But like other deployments, like we've done deployments in the US, for instance, and we've done deployments recently in Italy and all that, where we work with volunteers that are pretty much local. And we have volunteers who have said, okay, it's a disaster or it's deployment near where they live, and they volunteer for like a weekend or weekday evenings after work or whatever. So there's all kinds of ways you can be a volunteer. There's no set time limit or some time requirement. So we work with our volunteers. We value that volunteers donate not only their time but their skills and their expertise. So we work with them to make it fit as much as possible. You can support us by donating. Like I said, I mean, it still costs money what we do. Unfortunately, our work is not as expensive as any of the large NGOs, and we don't have flash offices and big expensive PR campaigns and marketing and advertising. We just don't see the point in spending money on that. But we still, occasionally could do with a few bucks to kind of keep the wheels greased and oil, so that everybody, our volunteers get where they need to go, that they have food, whether they're a roof over their head. And the last thing is, like, if you want to help us, hardware. We're always looking for hardware. I mean, Cambium supplies a huge amount of hardware for us. We have a really good relationship with them, but we always need more. We need sometimes switches or routers or whatever, and what we use more and more, like especially with deployments like now in Greece, is user devices, because we work a lot with the camps and with local NGOs by setting up internet cafes. So in those kind of cases, we've been looking in the past for like things like laptops and all that. So if you work for a company and you're upgrading your IT infrastructure, or you're upgrading your laptops or your tablets or even your smartphones, and you have surplus hardware, that yes, we can absolutely use that. So if you're interested in that, do get in touch. And again, then at the end, like we work in Greece, Haiti, Philippines, Ecuador, Haiti. Well, so volunteering with us is pretty much a life-changing experience. Like, you get to see a lot of the world. You get to see people under quite austere circumstances, but you make lifelong friendships. You also get to use your skills, your technical skills that you're using your day-to-day work. And you might be building campus networks, you might be building office networks, you might be building Wi-Fi hotspots in hospitality environment. But you can then use those skills and that experience to actually help people who are really in need, people who are in disaster situations, people who've lost their home, people who've lost their connection to the world, basically, who have lost any access to information, who have actually lost their ability to contact their friends and family. And you'd be amazed what kind of impact this kind of the simple thing as a Wi-Fi connection can make to those people. And again, if you're interested, there's the URL for our website, and there, all the information on there. There's information about previous deployments, there's information about how to volunteer, contact information. So do go have a look. There's email there. If you have questions, just shoot us an email, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. And that is pretty much on the slides.
Fantastic, Everett. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for joining. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to share them on the community, as well as on our social media accounts. This was recorded, so will be sent to everyone. So thank you so much for joining. Everett, I want to thank you for everything. And without further ado, I wish everyone a good day. Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you.